Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. So we pretty much have this motor ready to go back in the car. I have the engine completely assembled. I went ahead and test fit the turbo and wastegate just to get an idea how it's gonna look. I'm a big fan. I'm getting super anxious to get this back in the car. Now what I almost forgot to do is replace this rear main seal before we go any further. Right now it's being blocked by the engine stand. So we're gonna get the engine hoist and get this up in the air and we'll go from there. Now I wish I would have thought about this before I sealed the oil pan, because now I'm gonna have to clean and reseal this little bottom area, but that's all right. So we'll remove all of the bolts. We will then pry this off. Now what we're going to want to do is pry this old gasket out from the back side. We'll clean this up real good. So I have the old gasket removed and I found a 3-inch coupling that will fit this perfectly. So I'm going to use the old rear main seal to line it up with the new one. Use this coupling. And I was looking for a piece of wood or something so I could put on here to hit it flat. But what I do have is this big heavy compactor. I'm going to sit it flat on there and just gently hit it from the top. Okay, it's going in nice and even. Now we are almost flat. I'm going to give it just a few more taps. And there it is, nice and seated. And lastly, what I'm going to do is put some RTV on the oil pan. We'll put on a little blue Loctite. You want to make sure that you snug up the oil pan bolts first, so it'll set this at the proper depth and then work your way around. Once they're all hand snug, start again on the oil pan bolts, torquing those down to 88 inch-pounds, which is about 7 foot-pounds. You'll do the same with the 4 10-millimeter bolts, and then you'll torque these 13-millimeter bolts to 16 foot-pounds. Now the next thing we need to do is remove the pilot bearing. There's many different methods of doing this. A lot of people just use the bread trick, but at least on a M52, this is the larger hole, so most pilot bearing removal tools will fit. I'm not a fan of this tool exactly, but it does work. And we'll start tightening to pull it out. Comes out nice and easy. And just like that, it's out. We'll then wipe down this bore for the new pilot bearing. Coat this with some white lithium grease. And now there is a ridge inside of here where this will bottom out. You just want to find the right socket that will barely fit in. Now it's installed. So now that we have the new rear main seal and pilot bearing in, we need to install the flywheel clutch and pressure plate. Now this is an FX Stage 3 clutch kit. A lot of BMW guys run it. I ran the Stage 2 for the last 4 years in my car, and I never had a single issue with it, so I'm upping to a Stage 3 just to handle a little bit more power that I'm going to throw at it. And if it's anything like the first one that I ran, it'll be more than fine.
Now, I had lost a couple clips right here, but all we're doing is just putting on the flywheel. There's a dowel pin on the crank, so you can't misalign this. Just throw it on and snug up the flywheel bolts.
And then torque them to 77 foot-pounds. We'll spray the flywheel down with some brake cleaner. We'll then get the alignment pin on the clutch. Same thing on the pressure plate. Get that clean with some brake cleaner as well. And we'll line up the dowel pins. And we will install all the pressure plate bolts with some blue Loctite. Now this clutch does have a little bit of play in it, so you want to make sure it is centered. Then we'll hand tighten all the bolts in a crisscross pattern. And you have two different torque specs depending on what bolts you have. For the 8.8 grade bolts, they're 18 foot-pounds. For 10.9 grade bolts, they're 25 foot-pounds. So we will torque all of these to 25 foot-pounds in a star pattern. Now to get the transmission on here, I'm going to have to get this chain removed. So we're going to drop it down to the ground, make sure the transmission's good to go, and we'll get it pushed on here and get it torqued down as well. we'll install the starter. Okay, so everything's ready to go. I just pulled the hood off of the E30. I'm gonna move the wiring harness out of the way and we're gonna push this motor in and get it bolted up. Okay, so I got the motor in the bay. The engine mounts are bolted up. I just need to bolt up the trans. And then I want to test fit the turbo to see if this is going to clear. This is an E36 Rapid Spool Industries manifold, which everyone says doesn't work because I believe it puts the turbo too close to the core support, but in a situation like mine, I'm really not worried about it. So real quick, let's put that turbo on there and just see how it looks. As you can see, it fits just fine. You are a bit close to the core support, but I mean, that's really nothing. That's easy to work with. The wastegate is pretty close to the frame rail. I might notch out just a little section, but it looks like I'll be able to take this dump tube right through here, 45 it straight down. Okay, so I'm bolting up the transmission mount right now, and any of you who have an E30 know that these bolts are a pain in the ass. They just spin, and the little lip that grabs in here on mine is kind of stripped, so I got to do some kind of funny stuff to put pressure on it and tighten it at the same time, but we'll go ahead and get this all together. Now the next thing we're going to do is just get the engine harness all plugged in, zip tie a few things, and try to just get it kind of tidied up. So our intake air temp sensor, we'll plug this in when we put the manifold on. This is a wire I've never had hooked up. I believe it runs to the oil pressure or oil level switch that's in the pan, but I don't have that anymore. We have our cam sensor. We have our MAF. Now, I won't be using this at all. The standalone ECU that I run uses a MAP sensor, which is what we modified on the intake manifold. We're going to be using that instead. Here we have our crank sensor. And off the other end of the crank sensor is the Vanos and fuel rail. We'll plug the Vanos in. Fuel rail I obviously do not have on here yet. Here we have our NOx sensors. We have the E36 coolant temp switch. We have our TPS, which is not installed yet. Our fuel rail harness, not installed yet. And then we have our starter to alternator. And we have 3 wires for my gauges in the cab. I have oil temp, coolant temp, and oil pressure. So guys, that's going to be a wrap for this video. We got everything all tidied up. It's all nice and clean. I have everything zip tied against the firewall, and I have a cover to go over all of that. The entire engine harness is nice and zip tied and put away. The only thing I have left to do is plug in the throttle position sensor and intake air temp sensor once I get the manifold on. And we'll just keep on jamming away. Thank you guys for watching. See you on the next one.